Chosen one, this message is presented not as a coincidence, but as a reflection of timing. The appearance of this moment suggests alignment rather than chance. What is unfolding now is not described as gradual or incremental. It is characterized by acceleration, a shift that compresses what once took years into a much shorter period. In such phases, outcomes change quickly, structures reorganize, and long-standing patterns either resolve or dissolve. The experiences you have survived were not random disruptions, nor were they evidence of abandonment or misdirection. They functioned as preparation. Periods that once appeared confusing, stagnant, or even regressive were operating as recalibration phases. Doors that closed despite effort were not indications of failure, but of redirection. Timing was being adjusted, not canceled. During those earlier stages, it was natural to question sequence, purpose, and personal readiness. Many people in similar circumstances report questioning not only their decisions, but the broader framework guiding them. This is not unusual in extended preparation cycles. When progress appears inconsistent, doubt often emerges. However, what was taking place beneath the surface was not disengagement, but restructuring. The concept of reinstatement is important here. Rather than initiating something entirely new, the process underway involves restoring an original trajectory. In practical terms, this means returning to a framework that existed before interference, delay, or misalignment disrupted momentum. Reinstatement does not imply regression. It implies correction. Systems are being realigned to their intended configuration. This realignment is occurring across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Professionally, relationally, financially, emotionally, and spiritually, many individuals report changes converging rather than unfolding in isolation. This convergence is a defining feature of accelerated phases. When conditions are met, movement occurs broadly rather than sequentially. A notable characteristic of this stage is that effort begins to decrease while outcomes increase. This is often misunderstood. It does not indicate passivity or entitlement. Instead, it reflects efficiency. When alignment improves, resistance diminishes. Actions produce results with less friction because systems are no longer working against one another. Previously, pressure may have felt relentless. That pressure was not arbitrary. In complex systems, pressure is often used to reposition components. It exposes weak points, clarifies limits, and forces recalibration. Once repositioning is complete, the pressure reduces because its function has been fulfilled. This explains why recognition, access, and opportunity can shift suddenly. Individuals who were overlooked may now be sought out. Situations that once required justification now generate unsolicited interest. This is not coincidence. It is alignment reaching visibility. Importantly, this stage does not unfold incrementally. It arrives as a collective adjustment. Financial shifts, emotional stabilization, and spiritual clarity often occur in close proximity. This is not because each area is identical, but because they are interconnected. When the core stabilizes, dependent systems respond. The notion that waiting periods equate to denial is one of the most persistent misconceptions in development cycles. Delay often exists to build capacity. Introducing outcomes before capacity is established leads to collapse rather than success. What appears slow externally is often intensive internally. This is why reinstatement feels sudden. The groundwork was laid quietly. When conditions finally align, movement appears rapid because the preparation phase is no longer visible. Another defining feature of this stage is irreversibility. Once realignment reaches a certain threshold, regression becomes unlikely. This is not because challenges disappear, but because orientation has changed. Decisions are now guided by clarity rather than uncertainty. The concept of escalation here does not imply chaos. It implies compression. Processes that once unfolded linearly now occur concurrently. Learning accelerates. Consequences become immediate. Feedback loops shorten. This immediacy demands attentiveness. Hesitation carries greater cost in accelerated environments because windows of opportunity close faster. However, decisiveness becomes easier because clarity has improved. One of the most critical misunderstandings during accelerated phases is the assumption that collective momentum will carry everyone equally. In reality, this process is highly individualized. While many experience change simultaneously, outcomes depend on personal readiness. This distinction is essential. Social trends move groups. Developmental shifts move individuals. The current phase operates on the latter principle. External explanations may attempt to categorize changes as cultural, economic, or psychological. While those frameworks may capture surface-level effects, they do not explain individual differentiation. Differentiation occurs because readiness varies. Two people can encounter the same opportunity and experience opposite outcomes. The variable is not the event. It is preparedness. This brings attention to what can be described as spiritual or developmental loafing. This occurs when individuals rely on collective movement rather than personal engagement. In earlier stages, this reliance may not have produced immediate consequences. In accelerated phases, it becomes a liability. Loafing does not always appear as inactivity. It often presents as distraction, deferral, or assumption. The belief that proximity to progress equals participation is one of the most common errors during rapid transitions. In accelerated environments, personal accountability intensifies. Outcomes are directly linked to engagement. Preparation cannot be outsourced. Awareness cannot be borrowed. Alignment cannot be inherited. This principle explains why some individuals rise quickly while others experience stagnation or displacement during the same period. The system is not punitive. It is responsive. Another characteristic of this phase is simultaneous release and removal. As alignment improves, elements that no longer fit begin to fall away. This may include habits, relationships, roles, or expectations. The removal is not random. It is functional. Weight must be reduced before acceleration can be sustained. Systems carrying excess load fail under increased speed. Pruning, while uncomfortable, prevents collapse. This is why some losses occur alongside gains. They are not contradictions. They are components of recalibration. Retaining incompatible structures would undermine long-term stability. Those who resist this process often interpret removal as failure. Those who understand it recognize it as optimization. Acceptance reduces friction. Resistance amplifies discomfort. The speed of these changes leaves little room for neutrality. Accelerated environments amplify momentum in both directions. Engagement leads to advancement. Disengagement leads to marginalization. This is not ideological. It is mechanical. Systems respond to input. Reduced input yields reduced output. One of the more challenging aspects of this phase is its demand for sustained attention. Breakthrough moments are not sufficient. Maintenance becomes critical. Alignment achieved must be alignment preserved. This requires structure. Routines, boundaries, and review mechanisms protect clarity. Without them, drift occurs quietly and compounds quickly. Another challenge is misinterpreting intensity as decline. Rapid transformation often feels destabilizing. Established reference points disappear before new ones are fully visible. This creates temporary disorientation. However, disorientation does not indicate damage. It indicates transition. Stability is being relocated, not removed. Historical patterns support this interpretation. Periods of significant advancement are rarely comfortable. They compress learning, expose weaknesses, and demand adaptation. Comfort typically follows consolidation, not initiation. An additional phenomenon observable during this stage is what psychologists refer to as the pratfall effect, adapted here to developmental contexts. Errors, missteps, or sudden realizations become catalysts for rapid improvement rather than setbacks. In accelerated phases, feedback is immediate. Mistakes produce insight quickly. Adjustments occur in real time. This compresses the learning curve significantly. Those who respond with humility and correction advance rapidly. Those who respond with defensiveness or avoidance compound error. This environment also introduces a form of internal competition, not against others, but against previous capacity. Benchmarks shift. Standards elevate. Performance is measured against readiness, not potential. Accountability intensifies accordingly. Choices carry visible consequences. Excuses lose effectiveness. Justifications fail to override outcomes. This is not intended to induce fear. It is intended to encourage precision. When systems are operating at higher speeds, margin for error decreases. Precision becomes protective. As authority begins to emerge, it does so first internally. Decision-making stabilizes. Discernment sharpens. Confidence becomes quieter but firmer. External recognition follows internal stabilization. Influence expands organically rather than through force. Credibility accumulates through consistency rather than assertion. This authority is not designed for self-elevation. It is functional. It exists to manage complexity, steward responsibility, and sustain systems at higher capacity. The culmination of this phase is not spectacle. It is reliability, the ability to operate effectively under increased demand without collapse. This reinstatement phase sets the foundation. What follows is execution, stewardship, and long-term maintenance of alignment. The phase that begins here is defined not by recognition, but by responsibility. Once alignment has been restored and momentum has increased, the central challenge shifts. The question is no longer whether direction exists, but whether it can be sustained under pressure. This is where many trajectories diverge. Acceleration exposes weaknesses that slow movement concealed. Systems that were sufficient during preparation may prove inadequate during execution. Habits that were manageable at lower intensity become liabilities at higher demand. This stage requires refinement rather than discovery. One of the most significant adjustments at this level is the recalibration of decision-making. Earlier phases often relied on instinct, exploration, and trial. While those tools remain valuable, they must now be supported by structure. Intuition without discipline becomes unreliable under scale. Authority at this stage is not symbolic. It is operational. It manifests in the ability to prioritize effectively, to absorb complexity without paralysis, and to make decisions that account for second and third-order consequences. Authority is measured less by visibility and more by consistency. Pressure is an unavoidable component of this phase. Increased responsibility naturally introduces increased demand. However, pressure here serves a diagnostic function. It reveals inefficiencies, unresolved patterns, and misaligned incentives. Rather than resisting pressure, effective systems use it as feedback. The key distinction lies in response. Pressure does not require urgency-driven reaction. It requires assessment. Decisions made reactively tend to preserve short-term stability at the expense of long-term coherence. Decisions made analytically preserve alignment even when immediate outcomes are uncomfortable. This is where discernment becomes critical. Discernment is not hesitation. It is the capacity to differentiate between signal and noise, urgency and importance, opportunity and distraction. Without discernment, Acceleration leads to dispersion rather than expansion. Distraction often increases as visibility grows. Opportunities multiply, but not all opportunities are aligned. Some provide short-term validation while undermining long-term direction. Declining such opportunities requires confidence rooted in clarity, not fear of missing out. At this level, boundaries function as strategic tools rather than defensive mechanisms. They define scope, protect capacity, and preserve focus. Clear boundaries reduce decision fatigue by eliminating unnecessary variables. Energy management becomes an essential competency. Time alone is not the limiting factor. Attention is. High-impact execution depends on directing attention deliberately. Activities that consume attention without producing proportional value must be reduced or eliminated. This often requires reassessing commitments that were previously justified by momentum or goodwill. Letting go of such commitments can feel counterintuitive, but sustainability depends on alignment, not accumulation. Another defining feature of this phase is the transition from self-development to system development. Earlier stages emphasize personal growth. This stage emphasizes creating frameworks that function consistently, regardless of personal state. Systems reduce reliance on motivation. They ensure continuity during fluctuation. Processes, checklists, and review cycles protect outcomes from emotional variability. This is particularly important because emotional intensity does not disappear at higher levels. It changes form. Stress arises less from uncertainty and more from responsibility. Managing this stress requires proactive maintenance rather than reactive coping. Maintenance includes rest, but rest must be intentional. Passive disengagement does not restore capacity effectively. Reflective pauses, strategic withdrawal, and deliberate recalibration are more effective forms of recovery. Reflection at this stage is analytical rather than exploratory. It focuses on performance metrics, alignment checks, and risk assessment. Questions shift from "what am I meant to do?" to "is what I am doing still coherent with purpose?" Feedback mechanisms become increasingly valuable. Internal review alone is insufficient. External perspectives identify blind spots that self-assessment cannot. However, discernment remains necessary to filter feedback appropriately. Not all feedback reflects understanding. Influence attracts opinion. Authority requires evaluating the credibility, proximity, and intent of sources. This prevents overcorrection while allowing improvement. Accountability expands beyond personal outcomes. Decisions now affect others more directly. Consistency between stated values and actual behavior becomes observable. Inconsistency erodes trust quickly at this level. Trust functions as a multiplier. It accelerates collaboration, reduces friction, and amplifies impact. Trust is built through predictability rather than charisma. Reliability over time carries more weight than intensity in moments. As influence stabilizes, leadership dynamics often emerge, whether formally or informally. Leadership here is less about direction giving and more about environment shaping. Conditions are created in which aligned action becomes easier for others. This requires clarity in communication. Ambiguity scales poorly. Clear expectations, defined roles, and transparent reasoning reduce misalignment. Communication efficiency becomes as important as communication frequency. Conflict management also evolves. Conflict is not avoided, but addressed earlier and more directly. Unresolved tension compounds under acceleration. Addressing it analytically rather than emotionally preserves system health. Another challenge at this stage is internal drift. Drift occurs gradually, often justified by convenience or short-term gain. Without regular review, drift can redirect trajectories significantly before it becomes noticeable. Preventing drift requires periodic recalibration. Reviewing goals, values, and metrics ensures continued coherence. This is not regression. It is maintenance. Adaptability remains essential. Alignment does not mean rigidity. Context changes. Markets shift. Relationships evolve. Systems must be flexible enough to adjust without losing identity. Flexibility within structure allows evolution without collapse. It ensures relevance while preserving integrity. This balance distinguishes sustainable expansion from volatile growth. As execution stabilizes, outcomes often become less dramatic but more reliable. Progress is measured in consistency rather than breakthroughs. This can feel anticlimactic to those accustomed to intensity-driven validation. However, this stability is a sign of maturity. Systems are functioning as intended. Results are repeatable. Impact accumulates over time. Influence at this level is subtle. It shapes trajectories rather than dominating attention. It is felt through outcomes rather than announcements. The concept of chosen at this stage loses symbolic emphasis and gains functional meaning. It reflects responsibility rather than privilege. Selection implies expectation, not exemption. This reframing is critical. Authority is granted for stewardship, not elevation. Misinterpreting authority leads to overextension or misuse. Stewardship preserves alignment. Stewardship requires long-term perspective. Decisions are evaluated based on sustainability rather than immediacy. Short-term gains that compromise long-term integrity are avoided. This perspective reduces impulsivity. It supports patience not as delay, but as strategic timing. Knowing when not to act becomes as important as knowing when to act. The culmination of this phase is not finality. Alignment is not static. It cycles through refinement. Each level introduces new variables, requiring renewed attentiveness. What changes is resilience. Capacity increases. Recovery accelerates. Perspective broadens. Challenges become manageable rather than overwhelming. The work now is continuation, not searching, not proving. Maintaining coherence under expansion. The foundation has already been established. Direction has been clarified. Systems are forming. What determines long-term outcome is not intensity, but discipline. Not speed, but consistency. Not recognition, but responsibility. This is the execution phase, and it continues as long as alignment is upheld. The final phase does not arrive with announcement or intensity. It unfolds through integration. What was once learned, tested, and structured now becomes embodied. Alignment moves from something consciously maintained to something naturally expressed. This stage is defined less by effort and more by coherence. At this level, purpose no longer feels external or aspirational. It is internalized. Decisions are guided by an established framework rather than constant evaluation. The question shifts from, is this aligned? To how does this express what is already aligned? This subtle shift reflects maturity rather than completion. Integration means that values, actions, and responsibilities operate in harmony. There is less internal negotiation, fewer competing priorities, less emotional turbulence around choices. This does not imply simplicity, but clarity. Complexity remains, yet it is navigated with stability. One of the defining characteristics of this phase is quiet confidence. Not confidence driven by achievement or recognition, but confidence rooted in consistency. There is no urgency to prove alignment. Results speak through reliability over time. Presence becomes steady rather than performative. This steadiness often contrasts sharply with earlier phases. Where there was once intensity, there is now rhythm. Where there was once questioning, there is now discernment. Where there was once striving, there is now execution guided by principle. Importantly, this does not mean challenges cease. Challenges continue, but they are contextualized. They are interpreted as part of an ongoing process rather than as disruptions to purpose. This perspective reduces reactivity and preserves energy. Another key development in this phase is the ability to hold paradox. Growth and maintenance coexist. Expansion and restraint operate together. Action and patience are balanced intentionally. This balance is not accidental. It is learned through experience. The integration phase also brings a refined relationship with time. Urgency diminishes. Timing becomes strategic. Decisions are made with consideration for long-term impact rather than immediate outcome. This shift protects sustainability. Sustainability is the central theme here. Earlier stages build momentum. This stage ensures that momentum does not collapse under its own weight. Systems are reinforced. Processes are reviewed. Capacity is respected. This respect for capacity is crucial. Burnout often occurs not from lack of purpose, but from neglect of limits. Integration honors limits without interpreting them as weakness. Limits become guides rather than obstacles. Rest becomes non-negotiable, not as indulgence, but as maintenance. Physical, emotional, and cognitive recovery are treated as essential components of execution. Without recovery, clarity erodes. Another significant shift is how success is measured. External markers lose dominance. Internal coherence becomes the primary indicator. Success is reflected in reduced friction, improved decision quality, and sustained effectiveness. This reframing can feel disorienting in environments that reward visibility over substance. However, alignment at this level is not dependent on external validation. It is self-reinforcing. Relationships also evolve during this phase. They become more selective, but also more meaningful. Compatibility is defined by shared values and mutual respect rather than convenience or momentum. This selectivity preserves alignment. Conflict, when it arises, is addressed with composure. Emotional escalation is minimized. Disagreements are approached analytically. This reduces long-term relational cost and preserves trust. Trust remains a central currency. At this level, trust is built through predictability. Others know what to expect. Consistency over time establishes credibility. This credibility creates influence without force. Influence here is subtle. It shapes environments rather than dominating conversations. It encourages alignment in others without coercion. It is felt rather than advertised. One of the more understated aspects of this phase is the release of identity labels. The need to define oneself through roles, titles, or narratives diminishes. Identity becomes functional rather than symbolic. This release creates freedom. Actions are no longer filtered through image maintenance. Decisions are made based on alignment rather than perception. This simplifies execution and reduces internal noise. At the same time, responsibility remains central. Integration does not imply disengagement. It implies stewardship. Purpose is upheld through reliability, not intensity. Stewardship requires foresight. Decisions are evaluated for their ripple effects. Systems are designed to endure beyond individual effort. This long-term view distinguishes integration from mere competence. This phase also involves mentoring and transfer of knowledge, not through instruction alone, but through example. Embodied alignment teaches more effectively than explanation. However, teaching here is selective. Not all contexts require contribution. Discernment determines when to engage and when to conserve energy. Overexposure dilutes impact. Another hallmark of integration is resilience. Setbacks no longer destabilize identity or direction. They are processed efficiently. Recovery is quicker. Perspective remains intact. This resilience is built through repetition, through cycles of challenge, response, adjustment, and continuation. Each cycle strengthens capacity. Integration also reduces the need for constant self-assessment. Alignment is checked periodically, not continuously. This frees attention for execution rather than introspection. As systems stabilize, opportunities arise organically. They align with preparation. They do not require excessive adjustment. This congruence signals coherence. Importantly, not all opportunities are pursued. Discernment remains active. Alignment is preserved through selective engagement. Saying no remains a strategic skill. This selective engagement protects focus. Focus enables depth. Depth produces quality. Quality sustains impact. Over time, life begins to feel less fragmented. Roles integrate. Responsibilities align. Energy flows more efficiently. This is not perfection, but harmony. Harmony does not eliminate effort. It optimizes it. Energy is spent where it matters most. Waste is reduced. Friction decreases. This stage is often misunderstood because it lacks drama. It does not announce itself. It feels ordinary on the surface. Yet its impact is profound. Many overlook this phase because it does not feel like ascent. It feels like stability. But stability is what allows long-term contribution. In a culture that glorifies intensity, integration appears understated. Yet it is integration that sustains progress across decades rather than moments. At this level, purpose is no longer something pursued. It is something lived. Daily actions reflect alignment without conscious effort. This embodiment is the culmination of previous stages. Silence, preparation, discernment, execution all converge here. Importantly, this is not an endpoint. Alignment remains dynamic. Context evolve. Systems require adjustment. Growth continues through refinement rather than reinvention. The difference now is orientation. Direction is known. Identity is stable. Systems are functional. What remains is continuation with intention. The role of the chosen one at this stage is not to seek validation, attention, or acceleration. It is to uphold coherence, to maintain integrity, to execute responsibly. This responsibility is quiet, often unseen, yet it shapes outcomes more powerfully than visible. Intensity. Integration honors the journey by sustaining its results. It respects the preparation. By applying it consistently. It fulfills purpose. By living it daily. And in doing so, it transforms alignment from an experience into a way of being. This is the quiet fulfillment of purpose. Not declared, not rushed, but upheld. If you have reached this point in the message, it is not because you were searching for motivation. It is because something within you already recognizes stability, responsibility, and quiet direction. This call to action is not about urgency or emotional intensity. It is about deliberate continuation. The first and most important action is acknowledgement. Acknowledge how far alignment has already developed. Not through comparison with others, and not through dramatic milestones, but through honest observation. Notice how your decision-making has changed. Notice how confusion has reduced. Notice how reactions have slowed and perspective has widened. Recognition stabilizes progress. What is seen clearly is less likely to be abandoned. The next action is commitment to consistency. Alignment does not sustain itself through intention alone. It is preserved through repeated, disciplined behavior. Review your daily patterns. Ask whether they support the stability you now carry. Small, consistent actions matter more than occasional breakthroughs. Structure protects clarity when motivation fluctuates. This is also the time to reinforce boundaries. Alignment requires protection. Consider where your energy is being consumed without meaningful return. Examine obligations that persist out of habit rather than purpose. Strengthening boundaries is not retreat. It is stewardship. Clear limits preserve long-term effectiveness. Another critical step is intentional prioritization. Not everything that demands attention deserves equal investment. Identify the areas where your effort creates the greatest impact and the areas where it merely maintains activity. Reducing low-impact engagement creates space for depth and quality. Focus is not about doing more. It is about doing what matters most. Responsibility at this level does not mean isolation. Seek alignment in collaboration. Build relationships rooted in shared values, reliability, and mutual respect. Aligned. Partnerships multiply capacity and reduce friction. At the same time, practice discernment. Not every connection supports coherence. Choose quality over quantity. Accountability is another essential action. Establish systems that allow you to review decisions objectively. This may include regular self-assessment, trusted advisors, or structured feedback. Accountability prevents drift by creating checkpoints for alignment. It ensures that consistency does not slowly erode into complacency. Make reflection intentional. Do not wait for disruption to reassess direction. Schedule time to evaluate progress, systems, and priorities. Reflection at this stage is analytical, not emotional. It asks whether actions still align with principles and whether adjustments are required to maintain coherence. Contribution is also central to this phase. Alignment deepens when purpose extends beyond personal outcomes. Identify ways to serve, support, or share insight responsibly. Contribution grounds clarity in action. However, contribution must be sustainable. Overextension weakens impact. Choose roles that align with capacity and long-term intention. Patience remains a practical discipline. Growth at this level is incremental and often understated. Avoid the temptation to rush outcomes or seek validation through comparison. Progress compounds quietly through consistency. Trust the systems you have built and allow results to unfold over time. Rest is not optional. It is maintenance. Cognitive clarity, emotional regulation, and disciplined execution all depend on recovery. Schedule rest intentionally. Treat it as part of execution, not an interruption. Sustainable alignment requires sustainable energy. This is also a moment to release outdated identities. Roles, narratives, or expectations that once supported growth may now limit refinement. Letting go creates space for integration. Release honors evolution rather than negating the past. As visibility increases, remain grounded. Recognition is not the measure of alignment. Integrity is. Maintain consistency regardless of external attention. Alignment rooted in principle does not depend on validation. It endures through changing circumstances. If this message has provided clarity or reinforcement, remain connected. Continue engaging with content that supports discipline, discernment, and responsible growth. Consistent input strengthens consistent output. Alignment is reinforced through what you choose to engage with regularly. Sharing this message is another form of contribution, not as persuasion, but as support. Offer it to those who may benefit without expectation. Allow others to engage at their own pace. Alignment respects autonomy. Finally, choose continuation consciously. Alignment is not a destination reached once. It is a practice upheld daily. Choose to move forward with intention rather than momentum. Let clarity guide decisions, not pressure or noise. This call to action does not ask you to become something new. It asks you to uphold what you have already become. Maintain structure. Protect focus. Reinforce boundaries. Serve responsibly. Rest intentionally. Reflect regularly. Above all, continue with integrity. The direction is already clear. What determines the future is what you choose to reinforce today and consistently over time.